Everybody, welcome to the video. It's Wednesday, July 28th, and we're breaking down this 11-game main slate that we have over on DraftKings today. There is a 4-game early slate that does start in the afternoon, but I will not be covering it in this video. If you want some quick thoughts on it, though, I think that Detroit-Minnesota game looks great for offensive purposes. We have Willie Peralta on the mound for the Detroit Tigers and J.A. Happ on the mound for Minnesota, both pretty below average pitchers, so I think that game could pop off, even though Detroit's offense is never that great, but they have been hitting well recently, and a matchup versus J.A. Happ is always a great one. And then as far as pitching goes, I think guys like Blake Snell, Yusei Kikuchi, and Jake Odorizzi are all pretty interesting options. But as for today's 11-game main slate, it does look pretty good. We have plenty of aces on the mound. We have a decent SP2 option who could pick up plenty of ownership versus a pretty bad Rockies team on the road. And the offensive pieces look pretty good once again, so it should be another good one to break down. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new and you do enjoy the content that you are seeing. And if you don't follow me over on social media, I'm at Pennell16 on Twitter and CPen16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, get access to some extra content, including my entire spreadsheet, which is color-coded nice and neat so you know what is good, what is bad, projections, my own optimizer on the website, ownership projections, rankings, my cheat sheet, and my Discord community. I do update everything throughout the day. Link is down below for that. And since Patreon does charge you upon sign up in the first of the month, if you do want to sign up and get these last few days of the month for free, and as long as you continue your patronage on the 1st of August, I'll be more than happy to hit that refund button for you so you can get some extra content here for free until August. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. It's just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, no 150 max contests or salary cap restrictions. It's just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And if you look hard enough, you can find some pretty soft lines. And as of right now, if you're a new signee, you get a free money bonus up to $100. It's an instant deposit match up to $100. So if you deposit $50 or $100, you get exactly what you deposited back for free. So it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage? And just use code CPen. You better make sure you tell them I sent you. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. As per usual, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And there wasn't a ton of pitchers I thought were super interesting on this slate, but there was like a tight-knit group here that I do think we can target on tonight's slate. And we'll start up top with Walker Buehler, $10,500. He has been pitching very, very well recently. I love the recent form that he's in. Don't really love the matchup here versus San Francisco. They've been a pretty overall solid team this season, but with the way Walker's been pitching, he's a very talented guy. He has strikeout upside, and the Giants are striking out quite a bit versus righties this year. Low implied team total against him at only 3.49 is a slight favorite, 7.5 K prop. I definitely think he is our SP1 option on this slate. Just raw points wise, he should grade out the best. Pretty decent pitcher's park in San Francisco as well. And if we're looking at his splits overall this season, pretty darn solid. Can't really complain too much here. He's got a decent K rate at 26.5%. His ERA looks really good at 2.3, although I will say his xFIP and Sierra are about a run and a half higher at around 3.6, so I guess regression could be coming there, but I'm not overly concerned about it. Those are still pretty strong numbers. He doesn't really walk too many guys. He limits the power, gets a decent amount of ground balls, limits the hard contact, and less than a homer per 9. Now, if we look at the actual matchup here as a righty versus San Francisco, like I said, this is no cakewalk matchup. They actually have some pretty good numbers this season. Just about a 10% walk rate, close to a 200 ISO, a 331 WOBA, and a 109 WRC+. But the one bright spot here is that they are striking out over 25.5% of the time. Like, this is not a great matchup here versus San Francisco Giants, but there's a couple guys out of that lineup that, definitely do hit righties pretty well, and Walker Buehler should be just fine at $10,500, and he's been pitching very, very well recently, so I can definitely buy in on some Walker. I do think he's an excellent cash game target. Then dropping out Zach Wheeler here, $10,300. So I was playing around with some dummy lineups, as I always try to do before I record these videos, to see what roster construction could look like. And it is quite possible to roster Walker Buehler and Zach Wheeler together. Not saying that's something you absolutely have to do. You'll definitely have to find some bargain bats in your lineup. And if you're not comfortable with that, you can certainly drop down to a cheaper pitcher like Andrew Heaney, who definitely opens up your lineup a little bit. But if you want to make Walker Buehler and Zach Wheeler work tonight, it is certainly possible, and they're definitely the two best pitching options, just raw points-wise, looking at projections on today's slate. I don't think it's an absolute must, but if you want overall safety in your lineup, these guys should definitely be the best pitchers tonight. Now, Zach Wheeler gets a pretty tough matchup versus Washington. They have been hitting the ball well recently, but the one thing I will say, which is a big boost for Zach Wheeler, is that Trey Turner left last night's game with the vid, so he's not going to be in today's lineup, and Trey Turner is one of the best players in baseball, so taking him out of the lineup is definitely a monumental boost for Zach Wheeler, so keep that in mind when we're thinking about Washington's bats today. but they only have a 3.51 implied team total here. He's a pretty heavy favorite, 66% chance for the win, and I think the Phillies stack looks really good tonight versus Patrick Corbin, so I'd be very surprised if Wheeler can't pick up that 4-point bonus over on DraftKings tonight for picking up the W. 7K prop over in Vegas as well. And if you're looking at his splits this season, he's been one of the better pitchers overall in baseball. He typically works pretty deep into the game, a real nice 2.37 ERA, and his xFIP and SIERA are close to a run lower than what Walker Buehler's at, with a 2.73 xFIP and a 3.07 SIERA. Over a 30% K rate, limits the walks, limits the power, gets a lot of ground balls. Like, that's one of my favorite things about rostering Zach Wheeler, because he doesn't just give up a ton of homers. Like, he's only allowing a 22% hard contact rate this season, which is exceptional, and only a half a homer per 9. And like I said, I don't love the matchup here versus Washington. There's definitely a lot of good bats in this lineup, but when you take Trey Turner out of it, it definitely softens some things up, so I do think he's an overall very solid option tonight. And then dropping down to Lucas Giolito here, $9,800. I'll still put him in the ace tier, but I'd say he's definitely a level below guys like Walker Buehler and Zach Wheeler on this slate, because he's just a little bit hit or miss for me. Like, I feel like a lot of times I've been on the wrong side of rostering Lucas Giolito, and if we just look at his game log, I hate looking at game logs to make points here, but he's definitely been up and down. 10 points in his last start versus Milwaukee, but right before that, 39-point game versus Houston where he went the full 9 innings, 25 versus Baltimore, but then 2 and 9 versus Detroit and Minnesota. So he's kind of been up and down this season, but this is a decent enough spot versus KC where I do think he's viable, but probably more so in tournaments, because for a few $100s, I'd rather just pay it for Zach Wheeler, because I don't feel like there's any downside rostering Zach Wheeler today. I think he's just an overall very safe play. Lucas Giolito, there's a couple guys on KC that could certainly give him fits. Guys like Whit Merrifield, Salvador Perez, Jorge Soler went double dong, and he does give up power, which, you know, there is some power in this lineup. So you got to be a little bit careful here with Giolito, but I think he's an overall solid option here. A 4.3 implied team total against him. Pretty heavy favorite. I would be very surprised if Giolito, as long as he doesn't get blown up here and he can go 5+ innings, he should be able to pick up the win, because the White Sox stack looks like one of, if not the best stack on the entire slate tonight versus a lefty in KC. So that should be able to raise his floor to a degree, but he definitely does carry some risk. If we're looking at his overall numbers this season, they have been pretty solid, although there is a couple glaring issues. Now, his xFIP and SIERA and his ERA are all right below 4, which it's getting close to 4, which does concern me for a guy that's close to $10,000, but he does boast over a 28% K rate, not a ton of walks. It is close to 8%, which is a bit up there, but nothing I'm going to get too concerned about. The one thing I am concerned, though, is that he gives up plenty of power and homers. The hard contact's pretty good, but he does give up a lot of fly balls. Close to 185 ISO given up, 1.5 homers per 9, and a 45% fly ball rate, with the hard contact rate being pretty low, below Walker Buehler at 30%. So, I mean, that's fine. And I don't think he's going to struggle too much here versus KC. If you're looking at their splits this season versus righties, they don't really strike out much, only a 22% K rate, but walk rate below 8%, 144 team ISO, a 302 WOBA, WRC plus of 89, which if you don't know anything about WRC plus, kind of like the benchmark's 100, so they're definitely below average there. So I think Lucas Giolito is a fine option, but he does carry some risk here. And then if you need a cheap SP2 tonight, Andrew Heaney looks like he could end up being the chalk tonight, which I will tell you right now, I feel like Andrew Heaney chalk night has never ever worked out in the history of MLB DFS, so you have been warned, but it does look like a pretty good spot here. He does carry good strikeout upside. Now, the one bad thing about Andrew Heaney is that he always gives up hard contact, power, and fly balls, which has always been his issue. But if you can get past that versus a very soft Colorado team on the road, which I know if you look at box scores last night, they scored a couple of touchdowns versus the Angels, so you're probably thinking I'm crazy here and there's no way you're touching Andrew Heaney, but they are a team that does struggle on the road. Their numbers this season are very bad. They have an implied team total below 4. He's a pretty heavy favorite. Love the Angel stack today. I'd say the Angels are right up there with the White Sox as being the best stack on the slate tonight. And a 6K prop as well. And if you're looking at his numbers on the season, he's got a very ugly ERA. It's around 5.5, but his xFIP and SIERA are close to 2 runs lower, right below 4. A decent 28% K rate, close to 11 Ks per 9. 158 ISO given up, which is actually lower than Lucas Giolito. Good decent amount of fly balls, 34% hard contact rate, and 1.5 homers per 9. So there's definitely some risk there, but at his price point in this soft matchup versus the Rockies, when they're on the road, you can always target Colorado. I know it didn't work out last night, but I think things are definitely going to be different tonight. And I could see this being completely opposite, where the Angels score a bunch of runs and the Rockies do absolutely nothing here. Now, they don't strike out too much versus lefties, but they only have a 166 team ISO and a pretty ugly 89 WRC plus, which some of these numbers can be inflated from Coors Field, but WRC Plus does take into account for park factors, and the WRC Plus is pretty darn bad versus left-handed pitching. It's actually worse versus righties, but still not that great versus lefties. So I think Andrew Heaney is a pretty solid option here. As long as he doesn't get blown up, I think he should be in line for the win at the end of the game as well, which is always a nice little boost. So I do think Andrew Heaney is an interesting option. Just know that Heaney chalk night feels like it never, ever does work out. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the pitching, so we can move right on to the bats. And as far as the bats go tonight, there's definitely a couple of stacks that do look pretty good. We'll certainly be targeting them, and you'll see plenty of bats from those teams. But we'll start up top with the catcher position. We have JT Realmuto, $4,600, and the Phillies are one of those teams I was talking about. I think they're one of the best stacks on the slate here versus Patrick Corbin and a not so great Washington bullpen. They have a team total just below 5 here, and I would not be surprised if that rises by the time first pitch happens. But all the righties here for Philadelphia look really, really good. I think you can target lefties too in tournaments because at some point they're going to see a righty in the bullpen. But looking at Corbin's splits this season versus right-handed bats, it has been pretty ugly. Definitely been better versus lefties, but versus righties, not too pretty with only a 16% K rate, an ERA above 6, an xFIP close to 5, close to a 9% walk rate, giving up over a 200 ISO, 35% hard contact rate, and close to 2 homers per 9. So definitely think the righties can kind of tee off here versus Patrick Corbin. And then Max Stassi, $4,600. I think the Angel stack looks really, really good tonight. Team total above 5.5, which their lineup overall isn't really not that great. So when they have a team total that high, that means the opposing pitcher must be pretty bad. And that is the case tonight here versus Chichi Gonzalez, one of the worst starting pitchers in baseball. Plus the Rockies bullpen is the worst, if not the worst bullpen in baseball. So the Angels do look pretty good today. And Stassi's been really good this season, actually. A 290 batting average, 370 WOBA, 195 ISO, and a 137 WRC+. And those numbers are actually better than JT Realmuto. It's a smaller sample size, kind of actually half the at-bats that JT Realmuto does have, but Stassi looks pretty good tonight. He's got some pop, hits for a high average, hits a little bit lower in the order, but do think he's a pretty good tournament play if you are stacking the Angels. And then if you need a dirt cheap option, if you're double spending it for a pitcher, you probably can't spend it for a catcher tonight unless you make it a focal point of your lineup. So we have Jonah Heim here, $2,000, the cheap righty here versus Madison Bumgarner. And while I know Bumgarner hasn't exactly been as bad versus righties as he was the past couple of seasons, but he can still definitely give up a little bit of power versus them, and he is absolutely free, and he hits in a decent spot in the order for a catcher. So if you just want to punt the position, I think Heim is fine. There's a couple of other guys that look good, like Tucker Barnhart, and we'll see what the White Sox catcher we get in the lineup today. If it's that Zavala guy or Zavala, whatever his name is, he's only $2,200. Could be a cheap righty on lefty matchup there for a stack that I like quite a bit today, but we'll have to play that by ear. Then dropping that at first base, we have Jose Abreu, $5,000. And speaking of the White Sox, they're one of my favorite stacks in the entire slate today. Currently, they have the highest implied team total on the slate at 5.7. Good matchup here versus Chris Bubich, who maybe isn't the worst pitcher out there, but the White Sox do profile very well versus left-handed pitching, and getting Eloy Jimenez back has definitely been a boost for them as well. So liking all the White Sox here quite a bit, specifically the righties. And if we're looking at Abreu splits this season versus left-handed pitching, they have been excellent with a 337 ISO, 381 WOBA, and a 596 slugging. So I definitely like Jose Abreu quite a bit, although he is quite expensive. Then dropping out of Jared Walsh here, $4,800 should be betting cleanup for the Angels. And like I mentioned earlier, I think all the Angels make plenty of sense here versus Chichi Gonzalez. Just not a very good pitcher. Hasn't given up a ton of power this season, but he's certainly someone we can stack against. And Jared Walsh has hit right-handed pitching very well this season. And overall this year, he does have a 255 ISO with a 354 WOBA. So I definitely think there's a power threat here with Jared Walsh. And then Rhys Hoskins, $4,400, just a righty here with power versus left-handed pitching against Patrick Corbin. High implied team total, like all the Phillies here, quite a bit. And there was one guy I wanted to put on here, but I try to keep it to 3 guys per position. But Joey Votto has been hotter than the sun recently. I feel like he's homering each and every single day. And he gets a pretty solid lefty-on-righty matchup in Wrigley with the wind blowing out just a little bit. Also going to be pretty warm there. So if you want to go back to the Joey Votto well with how good he's been hitting recently, I think they have a 4.75 implied team total. I would have no issue with that whatsoever, but I just didn't like him individually more than the other guys I had listed here. But he is certainly playable if you are stacking the Reds. Then dropping down to second base, we have David Fletcher, $4,900. It feels terrible paying this much for David Fletcher because he pretty much has zero power upside, but he's always going to make contact. He's got a 312 batting average this season, and I believe his K rate's like right around 10%. Yeah, 10.2% walk rate and only a 4% walk rate. So he's going to put the ball in play. I know he's really, really expensive, but if you're full stack in the Angels, I can't imagine he's going to have too much exposure, and he's leading off, and he should be able to score a couple of runs tonight. Maybe he'll get a double or two, and should be just fine. I'm probably only getting there at tournaments because of that massive price point. And then dropping down to Segura here, I'll imagine he's going to be one of the chalkier bats in the entire slate because second base is not that great tonight. And he's got pretty much the same numbers as David Fletcher and about double the power. So why not just roster Segura at $1,000 cheaper? And I like all the Phillies anyway, especially righties versus Patrick Corbin. So I think he makes all the sense in the world. And then Josh Van Meter, $3,300. Again, just play Gene Segura in the slate, but if you don't want to for some reason, if you're scared of ownership or if you just can't afford him, you need the $600 savings here with Van Meter, I don't hate it. I've really been stacking against Jordan Lyles recently, but he's still a guy that will give up some power and hard contact to lefties, and Van Meter, he's got a little bit of pop versus right-handed pitching. Then dropping down to third base, this is again not a very good position today, kind of similar to second base. So if you just want to spend it for Yoan Moncada, because on the White Sox should be hitting cleanup, I would be okay with that, but I definitely prefer his splits versus righties rather than lefties, but he'll stay ready at some point anyway, assuming Chris Bubich doesn't last too long in this game. Then Alec Bohm, $3,400 is a cheaper righty here on the Phillies. I know his numbers aren't great this year, mainly trying to get exposure to the Phillies here. Then Isan Diaz, $2,000. So he batted 7th, I believe, yesterday. So if he is getting bumped down in the order, I won't have too much interest here. But if he does indeed bat near the top of the order at $2,000, the bare minimum versus Jorge Lopez in Camden Yards, one of the best places to hit. You get the guaranteed thing at bats on the road, and he does give a little bit of power versus lefties, and it's a massive park upgrade going from Miami to Baltimore. So if he does bat near the top of the order, I know his numbers have been absolutely awful this year, but if you want to double spend it for pitcher today, he's one of those guys that could open up your lineup quite a bit. And then dropping down to shortstop, we have Tim Anderson at $5,500. He's definitely the clear-cut option at shortstop today. If you have the money for him, they have the highest implied team total on the slate right now. He's good versus lefties. He hasn't shown a ton of power this season, but he is batting above 300, and I just like all the White Sox today, and he's going to be leading off. And then I just realized I'm out of order here. It should be Jose Iglesias first, so we'll start with him. $4,200. Obviously not the most exciting bat out there. Doesn't really carry a ton of power, but his batting average is pretty solid this season at $285. He's mainly just if you want to get more exposure to the Angels today, but I'd really try to make it a point to spend up for Tim Anderson at his position. Then Didi Gregorius, $3,900. Can't imagine he's going to have too much ownership here, so if you're looking for some more contrarian options on the Phillies, because I imagine they're going to be a little bit chalky, I think he's a decent option, and he has shown the ability to hit lefties in the past, and he's not that expensive, and you'll see it ready at some point anyway. Then dropping down to the outfield, he's also eligible at first base, but we have Shohei Ohtani, $6,400, and he is pretty much the top play on the slate. If you can make it a point to fit in Ohtani today, I'd feel pretty good about that, but I do realize his price point is very, very expensive, so if you do double spend it for a pitcher today, you might not be able to afford Ohtani, but he grades out the best for me. I was looking at projections, and I think he's projected like a point or two higher than everybody else here. He just grades out so well versus Chichi Gonzalez. I mean, the guy's not very good versus lefties. Ohtani has all the power in the world versus right-handed pitching. I mean, on the season, he's got over a 400 ISO, a 423 WOBA, and a 173 WRC plus with close to a 700 slugging. So yeah, I don't think you guys need me to tell you that Ohtani's good at baseball, but I'm here to tell you that he is if you need reassurance. And then Bryce Harper, $5,700. He's been on fire recently. He had the inside the park homer last night, which is really cool to see. It was a big hustle play from him. I mean, I know it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup here, so people will probably shy away. But if you're looking to get the more contrarian options on Philly, people might skip over Bryce Harper because of the price point and the lefty-on-lefty matchup. But he'll see it ready at some point, and he can hit lefties fine. So I'm not overly concerned about that. Then Jesse Winker, $4,500. I kind of already mentioned Joey Votto earlier, so I do prefer the lefties here. I do think the lefties are certainly playable versus Zach Davies, because if you're looking at his splits this season, he's kind of an annoying pitcher to stack against sometimes, but his numbers aren't that great. Like, he's got an okay 4.3 ERA, but his xFIP's around 5.3 and the Sierra's above 5.5, only a 15% K rate and close to a 12% walk rate. Doesn't give up a ton of power, but I think the Cincinnati Reds are an interesting tournament stack today. Can't imagine they're going to get too much ownership, but the lefties do grade out pretty well, and Jesse Winker's been one of the best players in baseball versus right-handed pitching this season. Then Andrew McCutchen, $3,000. I believe he went deep last night. Should be betting cleanup here. He's pretty cheap. Righty and lefty matchup versus Patrick Corbin has shown plenty of power versus lefties this season. Then Justin Upton, $3,700. Just more Angels exposure here versus Chichi Gonzalez. I know Justin Upton isn't the greatest bat these days, but he actually has shown some decent power upside this season with over a 225 ISO. Then Tyler Naquin here, $2,900. I always call him the great value brand version of Jesse Winker. And there's always some pinch hit risk here, but I like the lefty power upside here versus Zach Davies. Then Eloy Jimenez, $2,800. He has been like over 50% on the past 2 nights, and he's still dirt cheap. He went deep last night, and he's facing a lefty here. It's one of the best stacks in the entire slate. I'd have to imagine Eloy Jimenez at this price point will probably be close to 60 to 70% owned in cash games tonight, but I would just eat it. I mean, it's just a fantastic spot. He has plenty of power versus lefties, and he's going to be a guy that's around $4,500 soon, so just take advantage of this price point while you can, because it won't last long unless DraftKings really screws up their pricing algorithm. Then Andrew Vaughn, $2,800. So if you want to just pivot directly off the Eloy Jimenez chalk, Andrew Vaughn's got some decent pop versus lefties, so I wouldn't hate that. You can certainly play both in the same lineup as well, but he's more of a tournament option for me if he does end up hitting this low in the order. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the video, so I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy the content that you watched. I do cover other sports as well, so I'll be here pretty much every single day at all times of the year. And if you want to follow me over on social media, you can do so using the handles in the bottom hand corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, get access to some extra content, including the entire spreadsheet, the optimizer, the Discord chat, all that fun stuff. Link is down below in the description. And as long as you stay signed up until August 1st, I'll be more than happy to hit that refund button for you, since Patreon does charge you upon sign up and the first of the month. I don't want to get you guys double charged here because it's the 28th of July. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're a new signee, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 using code CPEN when you tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it. I will stop rambling, and I'll see you guys in the next video.